very, very blessed again to have an amazing plenary speaker all the way from Australia. Jason Renshaw is a former lecturer in the Department of English Education at Kelmbrook National University and the author of Boost, a well-known integrated skills coursebook. He's currently based in Australia, following 10 years in Korea in a variety of teaching and management roles, covering private language institutes, business English and teacher education programs at university level. He was a pioneer of content-based learning programs and online course delivery, as well as resources development for teachers of English. He's become very active with social media for education purposes, maintaining one of the world's most popular English language teaching blogs, where he debates and argues with the likes of Jeremy Harmer and others and tells them that they're occasionally ridiculous, and they tell him that he is too. They also say that they love him and that please don't stop doing what you do. He's acting as a co-founder and moderator for ELT Chat, which has about 60,000 followers, a Twitter-based teacher discussion and development initiative which brings together English language educators from all over the globe. He's also married to a woman who describes herself as the luckiest woman in the world. She's a doctor, very rich, and bought him a house on the south coast of Australia where he now resides and takes care of his children and works part-time. I introduce you the semi-retired ELT genius, Jason Renshaw.
Guess which part of what he just said wasn't true.
Rich wife?
Yeah, it's about my wife. Yeah. She would never buy me a house on the south coast. Now, this is really funny. Can you all hear me? No. Like some of the others, I prefer not to use the microphone. Oh, but I need to use the microphone so they can go on the camera. Right. This reminded me of another event I went to and we didn't have microphones that were working, and I stood up and said, "Can you hear me down the back?" And someone said, "No." And I found that a bit peculiar. Anyway, obviously I need to stay at the mic. Thank you for the introduction, Aaron. And thank you for inviting me to Kotesol. I was in Korea for 10 years. I left in early 2009 after 10 years in Korea, and I've been back in Australia for 2 years. This is my first time back in 2 years, so it's marvelous to be back. And I met one of my ex-students in the foyer from Kelmbrook earlier today, and she's now a teacher of English in a secondary school, and that was just fantastic to see her. So what I'm going to be talking about is ELT materials and the road ahead. Now, initially I had said that it would be the next 10 years, but who can really know the future? Who can really know what's going to happen? It's very speculative, of course. So, you should take a lot of my predictions and a lot of my impressions with a rather large grain of salt. But these are some of my instincts and these are some of my impressions about where we might be heading with ELT materials. Now, whenever you get to do a major keynote speech, one of the challenges you have is to think, well, how do I start? How do I get going with this? And I was in my hotel room yesterday, and something happened that gave me a good lead-in, I think. I had packed very quickly to come to Korea, and I didn't bring the mouse that goes with the computer. And I hate using those scroll pads on the laptop. I find that, I tend to get cramps when I use those, and I need a mouse. So I thought, where am I going to get a mouse? And I thought, well, I am in Korea. I'm pretty sure I'll be able to find one. And what I did was I went down the elevator of the hotel into the basement, where I found a supermarket that sells mouses, not mice, mouses. And so I took it back upstairs, thought, great, I've got my mouse. And I tried to open the box. I couldn't. I couldn't open the packaging for this mouse. I thought, so I thought, well, I need some scissors or a knife now. Who packs a knife when they travel internationally now? You're too scared to put toe clippers in your luggage now. So I didn't have a knife or scissors, so I thought, I'll burn it a bit with my cigarette lighter. And I looked up the smoke alarm and thought, no, that's not going to go down too well. So I chewed on it, and I chewed on it, and I wrestled with this thing, and I finally ripped it, and this mouse went boom across the room into the wall. But lucky he was a robust fellow, and he survived. But it reminded me about something that I had wrestled with for a long time in Korea, and that is the packaging. Korea really packages its stuff. I remember when I was living here, I couldn't even open a cookie. Like, I'd buy a box of cookies, and each cookie was wrapped. And I would have to open the cookie wrap, and I'd wrestle with it, and then the cookie would explode out of the wrapper. And I would say to my wife, my Korean wife, the doctor, you know, what's with the packaging here in Korea? It's intense packaging, you know. I'm going somewhere with this, by the way. And she said, well, packaging is really important to us. It shows us that the product is quality, that it is fresh, that it hasn't been tampered with or messed with, and we can trust it. If the packaging is nice and secure and very robust, then we know that we can trust this. And I thought, now that is one of the things I really want to talk about in my plenary tomorrow, is the idea of packaging. Because Korea is, I won't say obsessed with packaging, but packaging is has major impact on things like ELT materials and courses. Even packaging even affects education. Now, the picture I chose up there, you know, this is a sort of example of what I mean. That in Korea, the appearance and the packaging, in some cases, are even more important than the actual content. Right? Appearances are everything in Korea. Trust in a product, trust in a brand. These sorts of things are very, very important in Korea. And that extends to course books. Now, given this is a plenary, I'm going to do what every plenary speaker always does, and that is they promote their own stuff. All right? They normally tell you about the books they've written. They do it. Some do it subtly. Some do it more directly. I'm going to get it out of the way right now. Here's my books. All right. But the reason I'm showcasing that is because when I'd finished making these books, and I'd gotten all the initial copies, I put them all out on my desk, and I was so proud. And I thought, oh, these look so great. These look so good. The packaging was fantastic. But that got me to thinking about textbooks, course books. Now, I'm a bit of a strange beast because I'm a course book writer who now has serious doubts about printed course books. I don't think we should be using them anymore. I don't think we should be printing textbooks anymore. But it made me think, well, why do we still use them, and why are they still so popular? And I thought back to the time when I was a student, when I was a language student, and I was learning second languages. This was in 1991. This is pre-World Wide Web. You know, back in those days, now I'm feeling old, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have, all we had was a few TV channels, a few radio channels, and newspapers and libraries. That's all we really had. So in order to learn a foreign language, the only way you could really get access to the input and to the content of that second language was through a book, was through a textbook. And that textbook would basically light our way through a huge field of darkness. Without a textbook, you really would struggle to learn a language. You had the textbook and the teacher, and that was it. But that was pre-digital, and that was pre-internet, pre-World Wide Web. So one of the problems that has come about through textbooks and our obsession with textbooks is that they are very linear. They go in a straight line from a low point to a high point, and the idea is that if you go through the course book, you will progress through the language in I think a major publishing person once told me, it's an aggregation of principled, well-organized content. And to me, that's rather like this. It's rather like an escalator. Because course books have become so intense, and they've got so many supplements stuck on them, and they've got so many things, you know, they're huge now, the amount of stuff in them. And publishers are not saying this directly, but they are saying it subtly, that all you need to do is buy our book, and it has everything you could possibly need to learn the language. So jump on our escalator, and we'll take you from no proficiency through to a high level of proficiency. Only problem is if you fall off the escalator, you slide straight back down the bottom. But, you know, a lot of people don't talk about course books like that. They say it's just a tool, you know, it's just a basis, you can work around it. But publishers are now making textbooks so intense and so sort of full of stuff that I believe personally that teachers, one, are being forced to use them too much because an institution or a school says, here's your textbook, we've chosen it for you, it covers the term. And I think it encourages teachers not to think so much or to experiment as much. Now, what do you see here? Well, this is Gutenberg. Gutenberg designed the first printing press in 1440, I think it was, or 15th century sometime anyway. Now, why was this important? When Gutenberg, before he had invented this, books were written by hand, and each book was individual. Each book was unique. So obviously there weren't that many books written, and you needed to be quite wealthy to access a book. Right? And when this printing press came along, it changed everything. It changed the whole way we as human beings expressed our knowledge and shared our knowledge with a lot of other people. A lot of people say that the printing press was one of the key factors that brought us into modern times, and I would agree with that. But it looks like a medieval torture device, doesn't it? But now we have this thing called the web, the World Wide Web. And what I'm trying to generally say, I guess, is that we are going through another Gutenberg stage, but on a much, much larger scale. With the World Wide Web, I'll give you some quick stats to show you what we're talking about. Google reported in 1998 that they had 25 million web pages indexed, and about 58% of those were in English or something. Then they did another count in 2009. They had 1 trillion web pages. So, you know, even within 14 years of having a World Wide Web, we've got 1 trillion pages of material. And it's easily accessible. It's accessible to a vast number of people. Now, of course, not all of that stuff is useful. You know, there's a lot of dead branches in there. But I would say that we are in the middle of another revolution, which makes Gutenberg look actually really small. And if we're going to develop ELT materials, we have to think about that. We have to think about a complete change to the way we access information and the way we share information and use it. We're also in the middle of this thing called Web 2, which some people say is the social web. It's the web that allows, it's the social media web. There's various names for it. But basically what you see from Web 2 is a transition from producer-led content to user-led content. It's sort of very democratic, I guess. There's a groundswell of a huge amount of material appearing from users. They don't have to be experts. They don't have to be authorities. And there's all sorts of speculation on where the web is going from here. Web 3, and this was one of the charts I found. They're talking about a semantic web and a pragmatic web, and where the machine, the system itself is getting very smart and very intelligent. What the key challenge appears to be is to how to harness this huge amount of material so that we can actually find the stuff we want. That appears to be the major objective of where the web is developing. How do we sift through it? How do we get the material that we really want, that we'll be interested in? So how do we look into the crystal ball and think about what we're doing with ELT materials now and what might happen or what should happen or what needs to happen in the next 5 to 10 years? Can anybody tell me what they see here? These, any of you guys remember things called printed newspapers? Well, they used to be distributed out of these boxes. You'd put your coins in and take out a newspaper. I don't know exactly what they're called. They're like newspaper vending machines, or and you can see they're all being dumped. And that's because the newspaper industry, the printed newspaper industry, is almost dead. It is almost completely collapsed. And some people say, well, we're, especially in English language teaching, they say, no, we're going to have textbooks for a long time. We're going to have printed books for a long time. People are not going to give up on books. They like books. They're going to want to keep them. And I agree. I don't think books are going to disappear. I don't think printed material is going to disappear because, we still use candles, don't we? It's not like, when electricity came along, nobody used candles anymore. But I hope you see my point. We will still use books and we will still make them, but there'll be a bit of a novelty. There'll be a little bit for special occasions or special purposes. But I think if anyone says that 10 years from now, most English language learners are still going to be use a printed book, I think they need to have a good hard look at that. When was the last time you actually did a handwritten letter? Right? Again, people still do it from time to time, but it's usually a novelty. It's not the general way we do it. We will be using digital. We will be doing everything digitally for English language teaching within 5 to 10 years. It may even happen a bit quicker in Korea because Korea moves really quickly. Now, this presents a lot of problems for publishers because publishers have a huge amount of power over what we do in English language teaching. They are the ones who provide all these materials. And you wonder, what's this picture about, right? Well, I just want to give an example that when railways were developed, everybody thought they were the big thing. If you want to invest money, invest it in railways. Everyone's going to use railways. Everyone's going to need railways. If you want to make a lot of money, invest in railways. And of course, what happened? Henry Ford came along and made affordable cars for everybody, and then we built highways, and people realised they could drive where they wanted to go, when they wanted to go. And the railway system didn't collapse, but a lot of people lost serious amounts of money out of it. And the reason is those investors were saying, we're in the railways business, but they weren't in the railways business. They were in the transport business, right? And publishers need to remember that too. They are not in the printed paper business. They are in the materials design and distribution business. So sticking to this idea of print, I think, will end up, if any company says we're only going to do print, they're going to end up like that. In the next 5 to 10 years, we're also going to see something drastically different happen with authors, with writers. Now, here's how it kind of works at the moment. If you want to write an English language teaching book now, generally what happens, you need to either be an academic who's written a lot of paper and is quite famous and gets invited to contribute to a course book. The other way is to come to events like this and do marvellous presentations and get noticed by a publishing person who then takes you away and invites you to write a book that they've already planned. They've already planned it. They plan 4 to 5 years ahead. And you think, oh, wow, yeah, I want to write a book. Oh, I'm going to be able to put my ideas out there. But, in all honesty now, the people that are selected to write English language teaching books are there because of their promotional value, first and foremost. Some people in publishing might say that's unfair, but the reality is if you want to write an ELT course book now, you need to be a good presenter who can travel and go to events and charm people and be good looking. I know what you're thinking. How the hell did you write a course book? But in the next 5 to 10 years, this whole model is going to change completely because the gatekeepers that were the publishers are no longer the only ways to make material and distribute it. And I'm going to give you examples of that later. But there's also a monetary issue here. Now, if you write a book for an ELT publisher, depending on who you deal with, your first major course book will probably get you about 2 to 12% of the royalties, right? depends on who you're dealing with and how much push you have. 2 to 12%. It's not much. But when you go and you self-publish and you put your books on Amazon or you distribute them through your website or whatever, if you do it with Amazon, for example, you get 75% of the royalties. And you have creative freedom. You can write the books you wanted to write. So it's a really dynamic thing going on at the moment. There are mainstream authors, not ELT authors, but there are mainstream authors now who are refusing offers from publishers of up to $500,000 in advance, and they're just putting it on, making an ebook and selling it on Amazon, and they're making millions from it. So I think we're going to see that happen a little bit with ELT as well. I think what we see in the mainstream book market, some of those aspects will come across. I think you're going to see a lot of interesting and talented writers appear who aren't represented by a publisher, that are just going to make stuff and distribute it. And, you know, it's going to become a very open field, I think. Now, what are we looking at here? What we're looking at is mobile, right? We're looking at mobile devices. Now, how many of you ban your students from using their phones or tablets in class? Hands up, be honest, it's okay, put your hands up. Wow, quite a few, quite a few. That's an interesting topic that I'm not going to go into here and now, but I think we can agree that these products are becoming cheaper. They're becoming cheaper, you know, because of the competition and the range that is appearing. They are becoming more accessible. More and more people have them. And I think we need to recognize that our learners have these tools. Now, you can ban it from your class or you can use it. Right? But one of the big effects of this is that those mobile devices are making these devices really cheap. You know, I think within the next 5 to 10 years, you'll be able to pick up a netbook like that for 100,000 won, maybe less, right? But what's really appealing to me is when these devices become really, really cheap, we can start putting them in schools. We can make sure that every student has one. And once we do that, we can start to make all our material digital. Right? They can download it onto their computers. They can also access it at home or in a central library. But I think this, in Australia, for example, they've just finished an initiative to make sure every high school student has a laptop computer. And the government paid for that. So all the high school students get a laptop. Is there something similar in Korea? No. But there should be, I think, if it's not already sort of happening. Now, remember when I showed you the escalator? I showed you the linear, direct path that happens when you use a textbook. This, to me, is a better representation of what we can do with digital material. It's not linear. It's not direct. It's more circular and more expansionalist. That we can still have a core curriculum. And if you look at the railing that appears there, that can be sort of a bit of a safety railing for people who want a structured curriculum. You know, they want objectives met. They want, you know, we've got to test the students. But we still need a bit of a core curriculum, especially in the public school system, in order to manage that many students with the teacher-student ratio. We are still going to have standardized testing. We still need a core curriculum that people can follow. But we can expand off it in ways that the students will find interesting. We can incorporate their own content into what we are doing. We can experiment more. And if a student falls off this, if someone plunges off this stairway for some reason, you know, like, oh my God, you're giving me my freedom, I can't handle it, I'm going to, and falls off that staircase, we've got a nice safety line down the middle that they can grab onto before they fall down. And by that I mean that's the core curriculum, that's the preset curriculum. I'm not saying we should do away with that. I realise that having a preset system is important for a variety of reasons, but we can now scale that back and let the teachers and the learners choose more of their own content and different ways of using it. Now I'm going to give an example of what I think needs to happen with ELT materials in the next couple of years going through for the next 10 years. I should just point out, I'm a little bit of a conservative user of tech. You're going to see presentations today by people who show you amazing virtual worlds and amazing tools, but I'm a big believer in simple stuff that most people can use that is pragmatic and is practical. And I'll leave all the visionary stuff to the people who are doing great work in those fields. I want to start with simple stuff. And to me that is, this is a series of units from my course book series, and that's 5 different strands, 5 different books. And I've taken all the material that's related to one theme and put them up there like that. Now, if we were to make this a digital resource, we would be able to put all those pages up there, and then we would make it searchable. A teacher would be able to log on, perhaps with the students. They could do it together, or the teacher could do it by themselves in advance. They could search this material for the topics, the key language, the vocabulary that they think could be relevant to their students. And then they could actually plot and select their coursework. Now, they don't have to use all the pages. They can just use the pages they think are the most relevant or the most interesting, or cover the skills or grammar that they think is most important. But if this is all still addressing the core curriculum, or all of it still addresses what was designated as the core curriculum, we're just creating choice. Then, because this is digital, we don't have to print it. It's all on screens, on students' computers. We can actually say to the students, now, you can choose, on your own or in groups, you can choose some other aspects of this unit to work on. Right, the purple stuff. We can let the students select some of their own work. Now, you've all heard of extensive reading, yes? Which I think is a fantastic thing, and it's a great thing happening in our field. But I also believe in extensive language input, not just reading, just extensive language practice. And if we create this much material, hopefully it says to the students, if you want to go on with it, if you want to do more, you can do it. You can select it and go on with it. And based on the material that the teacher chose and that the students chose, the system should be able to collect all that information and generate review material and extra practice material based on that content. This is technology we already have access to. This is already possible. This is nothing major. It's just no one's really doing it yet. And of course, we can also create automated tests based on the material that we've chosen. And of course, we can change the order in which we do any of this. We could have the teacher select the stuff first and then test them, then let the students choose it, and we can very much with an interface change around and manipulate this material. But then we should be able to add teacher content. Right? I think teachers are becoming much more tech savvy now than they were, for example, say even 10 years ago. They can create their own documents. They can source their own material. And what if we had a system that allowed them to upload it and connect it to this core curriculum that we have that they can choose and select from? And then we can create also projects, web quests, task-based learning. We can also add that to the collection. And of course, student content. Why not let the students choose some of their own content based on this theme? We are now at a point where we don't have to have learners flipping through the book and then taking the review and taking the test. Students, if they are so motivated, we can say to them, why don't you make your own test for this? Why don't you make some follow-up content for this? And we can upload it, and then we can connect with other teachers all over the country or all over the world, and we can share all this material. And it can be all linked into this one interface for one, say, module, one module of work. But we need to do a lot more than that with our digital material. We need to make it all searchable. A student wants to remember a word, like they can't remember a word or they can't remember what it meant. They should be able to plug it into a search box and find all the relevant material that used that word. We can update it. Now, when you write a textbook, a printed one, what usually happens is some of the material starts to go out of date because, we've got some news items or some movies or something like that. And the usual process is, if the book sold enough millions of copies, they make a second edition, say 5, 6 years later, they'll make a second edition and they'll update the stuff. No longer do we have to wait 6 years to update something. When it's all online like this, authors and producers and even teachers themselves can go in and update this information, make sure that it is up to date. It's adaptable. People should be able to comment on the material, say what they liked, what they didn't like. Now, I'm going to talk about adaptable in 2 different ways. One is that I think it has to be open source. And this is a big issue at the moment. A lot of people are talking about open source. But I think that if you make material now, you have to make it available in a format that lets teachers edit it and change it and redistribute it in a way to their students. That's the first adaptable that I'm sort of pushing for. The other one is allowing students to adapt the difficulty of the input. It's a bit hard to explain. If we have a text in the material and it's at, say, this level, I think it's a great thing if a learner could say, I don't really understand that. I'd like to see it more in a simpler way. And they can click on an option and it simplifies that text. It uses a lower level of text for the same topic. But then a student who wants to experiment more, who says, well, I can understand that. I wonder what it would be like to see it with more difficult language. They should be able to upscale the difficulty of the language. We have this technology. It means authors have to make, say, 4 or 5 scripts for one text, but learners can really sort of explore their way through the different levels of that text. That's something I'd love to see happen. Audio and video should be embedded in the material. No more CD-ROMs, no more going off to other sites. You should be able to look at your course material and click on a button, the video pops up, or the audio is there. It should all be embedded in the digital document. We should also have the capacity to let students record themselves inside the material, whether it's a note to themselves or whether it's actually a communicative activity. There should be the capacity for them to record their conversation with a classmate, which a teacher then can listen to later and give some feedback. But this is all possible. This is all possible with digital material. Students should be able to take notes and bookmarks and tags based on the material. They should be able to personalize it in ways that suit them. Feedback. Now, we are at an interesting time with technology because we now have systems that allow us to automatically evaluate things like writing, but also speaking. And one of the things you'll see today is, I think, English Central. They're based out there. They have a tool that allows students to speak and actually they can practice their pronunciation by listening and repeating, and then the actual site tells them how well they're speaking, and it's all automated. It's not all that accurate yet. It's not quite as accurate as it needs to be, but I think within the next 10 years we're going to see speaking and writing, a lot of it can be automatically graded and given feedback on. I'm not saying that should replace a teacher. It can't completely replace what a teacher does, but when students can take this material home and use it on their own or use it in groups, if they can get that automated feedback, that is precious. That is precious. And then we can do other things with our time as teachers. Portfolios, the students should be able to collect all their work, all the content that they like, and put it into an ongoing portfolio that is accessible. There should be links to related content around the web. Current news items, for example, YouTube clips that relate to the content that they've been using here. And there should be the capacity to build communities around this. It really excites me, the idea that students in Korea, for example, using this book here, could then make friends with kids in other countries all over the world who are also using that module. They can develop friendships. They can use English as a communicative language to build friendships and communities. And teachers too. I think it's great that teachers could create networks around the material, that they could access opinions and help from teachers in other places. The big challenge, of course, is all of this needs to be viewable and accessible on all platforms. We're not quite there yet, but we are getting there. I was talking to, have any of you heard of Voxapop? Yeah, Voxapop. I know the maker of Voxapop. He's from Melbourne as well. And he was telling me that in his newest upgrades to this platform and this tool, that he had managed to make it accessible on every single device known to mankind. And that is where we need to be. We need to make sure that it doesn't matter if you've got an iPad or an old laptop or a Samsung handphone, you should be able to see this content. That material up there should reflow and readjust in ways that allows you to see it on a smartphone or on a tablet or on a large screen. This is an interesting one which I'm going to sort of skip over for now, but I think over the next 10 years we're going to see some interesting developments, and one of those is that you could have your students go in and use content, but then they could actually find online teachers. If a student wants to have their own private teacher or their own private help with an issue, that they can actually connect with teachers through this material, and that those teachers are rated by the students. That their reliability, their skill is completely user-based. Rather than saying, go to this school because we recommend the teachers, I think we're going to move to a model where the users themselves are telling you who are good teachers to get in touch with. And I think, for example, if I'm going to write a textbook like this and put it all on the internet like that, the great thing is teachers can contact me directly about it. How many of the textbooks you use now, printed textbooks, how many of you can actually contact directly the person who wrote it? How many of you can say to the author, what's this, why did you choose this unit, or what's sort of going on with this activity? All right? No, there's a huge distance between you and the author. And in the future, that distance is going to lessen or, in fact, disappear. And I think most authors are fine with this. I know I am. I know if someone's using my material, I know, you're going to get hundreds of questions, but if you've written something that you're proud of and you've really invested in, there's nothing nicer than having that conversation with teachers who are using it in the classroom. Now, can it be done? Well, as I said, most of the technology that we're looking at here is already available. It's just a matter of sort of harnessing it and organizing it. And surprisingly enough, there is a major publisher who is heading in this direction right now. Do you know who it is? All right, write down on your pad there, English 360, and go to Google and search for it. English 360 is an online provider of course content that has merged with Cambridge University Press. And this surprised me a little bit because Cambridge is one of the more conservative publishers, but they've actually created something called English 360. They're taking content from their existing textbooks and they're digitizing it, and they are allowing teachers to upload their own content and organize it in courses. They can take whatever they like from whatever source and put it into a course that allows them to deliver that to their students. They aren't doing all of these things yet, but they've made a really, really positive start. And, I like to sort of give publishers a hard time, but when they do the right thing, I think I should mention that. And Cambridge and English 360 are doing some fantastic things. Check them out. Now, Second Life. You're going to hear a lot about Second Life today. There's a lot of people who are big users of Second Life. Because we are running behind schedule, I'm actually going to skip what I was going to say about this. But I'm not actually a big fan of Second Life as a language learning tool. Some people here, that makes me sort of cursed. But the point I want to make is that if you're going to make things for online language learning, if you and your learners can't get into it and access it with your existing technology and understand it and use it within 30 minutes, it's never going to work. And Second Life requires a pretty big investment of time, training, and also you need a lot of broadband. That's not really an issue in Korea, but it's certainly an issue in other countries. But anyway, I'll skip that for now and let the other people that are presenting today talk about the virtual worlds and the virtual... Yeah. Oh, what? Come to Paul Privish's at 4:30? 4:30. In room... Look in the schedule. And you'll hear lots of interesting stuff about Second Life. Now, another thing we need to be careful about is all these tools that we are finding on the internet. How many of you have heard of Ning? How many of you got a bit upset with Ning? What happened? They started charging. They were free. They were a free forum and community-based tool. And out of the blue, they said, no, now you have to pay money to use this. And teachers had put all this material and all this time and effort into it, and they couldn't afford to stay on the platform. How many of you have heard of TalkBox? TalkBox, which is a video conferencing tool. Yeah, a lot of people invested in that as well with their students, and suddenly they said, we're closing it. We're closing it. What you need to be careful of if you're a teacher that's looking to invest the time and effort and knowledge in tech is that there is no such thing as a free lunch, okay? There is this misconception at the moment that the internet is free, that the World Wide Web is free, that there's somehow there's these people out there that are angels who like to make great tools and everybody's going to be able to have it for free. Nothing is free. Nothing in life is free, except love, I guess. Now that costs a bit too. South Coast, marry a doctor. This is a very, very small selection of Web 2 tools that are out there. That's a very limited selection. They are popping up everywhere. What you have to understand is that most of them are either looking to go to a money-generating system at some point, but most of them are living the YouTube dream. And that is, they want an exit strategy. They want to build a tool and collect 1 million users or something, and then sell it for 30 million. That's what most of these tools and platforms, that's how their business model works. They get angel funding, right, to build their tool and feed them while they make it. And they tell you, oh, it's a great tool and it's free and everybody enrolls in it and uses it. This is actually really risky if you're going to use it for language teaching. Because there's nothing worse than showing your learners how to use something and creating a course around that, and then it either goes to a pay-for model or disappears. Right? You need to be very, very careful with the tools that you use. And I think part of the next 5 to 10 years is going to dawn this realization that the internet is not free, and that if you want quality things, you have to be willing to pay for them. Some people might disagree. Now, I'm nearly finished. Bit of a curveball, isn't it? I'm going to show you what I call the Lone Ranger model. Now, the Lone Ranger model is going back to a little bit this idea of an author, what the authors are going to be doing in the next 5 to 10 years. And I'm going to use an example of something I've been doing for the last 2 years. I'm not the Lone Ranger. I like to dress up as him sometimes. Now, this is my online school. Now, when I went back to Australia, I thought, well, I'm not really ready to, there's not actually that many jobs or opportunities for ELT in Australia, and I've got a little bit of tech knowledge, so I'm going to make my own school. And I'm going to concentrate on TOEFL, which is one of my areas of expertise. And this is using very simple technology. This is just using basic web pages with audio and video and scrolling, iframes to scroll through the content. And I now have 300 online students. I now make my living almost purely from this online school. There is no publisher. There is no school. It's me and the learners. The learners are finding me directly. They are listening to the recommendations of their friends and the people they know on the internet. There is no publisher here. There is no school. And when you cut out those middlemen, a couple of interesting things happen. When you cut out the school and the publisher, you can make a tool like this. You can update it whenever you like. You can put more of the content you really think you believe in, that you think is really effective. You do not have to make so many concessions to all these interests who want to sell a book globally or want to sell it just here or there. And it's really cheap for students. Now, this is a TOEFL-based school, and my users can access it for about $15 a month. To go and get a similar amount of content from a print-based book with audio CDs is going to cost them about $50 to $70. Right? Or they can get it all online, they can contact me directly, they can work with me directly, access all this material. I'm making very good money, they're saving a lot of money, they're getting good scores on their tests. And there's no school and there's no publisher. Now the reason I'm showing you this is you can also do things like screencasts. You can develop simple tools that allow you to do some really effective teaching through the online medium. And you can make it in a system that can be upgraded. They can just access the content, or in my system, they can access the content, the practice tests, and they can record themselves online in this audio recording thing called Voxapop, and I'll check their responses and give them feedback. Right? And this is still cheaper than a textbook. And on a monthly fee basis, they can actually access all of this for almost half the price of a mainstream published course book, and there's no feedback in the course book, is there? There's no teacher involved in the course book other than just writing it. This is what's now possible. It's possible to do this. I've got something like 4 or 5 competitors who copied this model from me, and they're making a lot of money as well. And I think, good luck to you. Good for you. Some of them contact me and ask me for tips, and I share the knowledge. That's where we're going in the future as well. The idea of sharing, the idea of collaborating. There are enough English language learning fish in the ocean for independent, proactive teachers to make a good living. I'm not talking about becoming a millionaire. I'm talking about being able to support your family, hopefully buy a house, and actually have a normal life. Now, I'm going to be at this conference all day, and I'm doing a workshop later in this afternoon. If you are interested in what I just showed you with my online school, if you are a teacher that has some basic tech skills and has a bit of vision, come and find me and I'll tell you how I did it. If you dream of escaping the publishing sort of circle, if you dream about getting away from the limitations of teaching in a school, come and see me and I'll tell you how it happened, how it works. Because it's very, very liberating. And it's a fantastic feeling to make that direct connection with your students. And I'll give you an example of how powerful it is. Have you heard what happened in Japan with their big chain schools? Nova and those guys? Well, they collapsed. All right? Those schools collapsed. In the space of about 3 months, roughly half the number of students who were going to academies stopped going. My online enrollment went up 300%. I got a heap of online students from Japan straight after all those places went bust. No, I'm not saying that schools are going to disappear, but I think 10 years from now, we may have, maybe not most, but certainly we're going to have a lot of schools based purely online. They're going to be run by independent teachers who work maybe with some other teachers. Publishers are going to be cut out of it completely, as are the schools, because the key point to note is the students these days are not like the students we had like 5 years ago. They're comfortable on the World Wide Web. They're more independent. They're willing to look around and see things. They're willing to network with other people they know to get recommendations. They're not the sort that looks in the newspaper and says, here's the English Academy, I'm going to go there. That is changing a lot. Now, the reason I've put this here is, one of the great things I think is going to happen over the next 10 years is we're actually going to do different things in the classroom itself. Now, if we can put most of our coursework on the World Wide Web, if we can make it stuff that can be as accessible at home as it is in the classroom, what we can start to think about is what we do with our classroom time. Right? Now, if all the material is accessible at home or in a computer lab, maybe we can stop going through textbooks in class and actually have more conversations. Task-based learning, projects, stuff like that. We can say to them, look, if you want to study the grammar and get, practice that, go onto the online system and practice it. But here in class, we're going to create a social group and we are going to teach Unplugged. Have you heard of that term? You have, that's great. Scott Thornbury would be so happy to hear that, because teaching Unplugged is basically removing preset material, removing all the grammar syllabus, and just dealing with the people in the room and making the language learning experience about them and what they would like to talk about. If you're interested in that, that's what my seminar, my workshop in the afternoon is going to be all about. People who come to that are going to watch me walk in with no material at all and develop, with the people in the room, a course book that the learners write down as they go. If you're interested in that, I'll be doing that in the afternoon. I did cut a few things out of the talk today because we were running behind schedule. You must be getting a bit hungry, I know I am. As I said, it was a limited look at the future, a limited look. It was a more practical look at what I think we can do now, because it tends to take 5 to 10 years before good change actually comes about. So I did stick with some simple things. I hope it gave you something to think about. And if you are interested in becoming a teacher who opens their own school online at some point, I'm here all day. Come and have a chat. Thanks very much for your time.